Hi, everyone. So today I want to give you a really important tool for communication, perhaps the most important communication tool that you can ever embrace and utilize. And this will work with coworkers, it'll work with your kids, it'll work with your spouse, it'll work with yourself, it'll work with anyone that you're talking to. And the most important thing we can learn how to do when we're communicating with somebody else is to stop talking. So that's kind of interesting, right? It's not about doing more talking at those times. It's about stopping the talk. And that's hard to do because if you've ever been in an argument or triggered or flooded with emotion or reactive, you know that it is so difficult to stop, right? It is so hard to take a pause, not be right. First of all, recognize that you're flooded, right? Not be defensive, not be reactive, and take a pause. So when I talk to couples, this is one of the most important skills that we learn. It's the first skill that we learn, and it's the most difficult, quite frankly. So what's actually happening in an argument? Why is this so important? Okay, so when we are in an altercation with somebody, a conflict, often what happens is our defense button gets triggered. There's a part of us that gets triggered probably by something that somebody said that actually has more to do with us than this moment that we're in anyway. But either way, we're starting to get triggered. We started to get defensive. And when that happens, there's a part of our brain called the limbic system, which is the reptilian part. It's the automatic part. It's the reactive part. That part starts to take over. The problem with that part of our brain is it doesn't think. It just reacts. It's very automatic and it's very fast. So this is when we start to say things that are defensive or angry or aggressive. We start to do things, with our bodies that are defensive and perhaps aggressive and reactive. So this is when all we're doing at this moment is reacting. So if you have two people that are in a conflict and that part of the brain is running the show, literally nothing's happening except perhaps dysfunction and some destruction, because it's not uncommon at all for us in that moment to say things that we don't actually mean, that it takes a while to come back from. So when that part of our brain is running the show, really there's nothing happening. And I have told so many couples over the years, I have learned this myself, at least I practice this one. When you feel flooded, stop talking, right? Stop talking. What we need to do is enough time. We need to put enough time in place for the brain to switch from the limbic system to the cortex, which is the thinking part of our brain. So now we can actually have a conversation about what's happening. Otherwise, nothing's actually happening. So I like to say that this is the timeout process. This is the conscious conflict timeout process. And it is simple, but extremely difficult. And it is the most important aspect to communication, is to learn to stop talking when you feel triggered. Take a break. So, because in that moment of escalation, it is so common that we say things that we regret or have to actually come back from later. Okay. So it really provides you with a cool down, with a space. And what we know scientifically, this is data from John Gottman, who's an amazing relationship therapist, and he studies this stuff. So he's like on the front lines, and it's not about theory, it's about reality. So he did a really interesting test with couples where he hooked them up to these machines to kind of test if they were in the sympathetic nervous response or that reactive place. And then he had them argue, and then he came in and he said, okay, now stop arguing. The machine broke. Take a minute, and then they'd have to stop, right? And then he said, okay, start over. I fixed the machine. And then he'd come back in. And what he found, long story short, was it took about 15 minutes for the lizard to go back into the cave and the thinking part of the brain to take over. So at least we need about 15 minutes for a timeout. So what does this look like? What does this mean? How do we do it? Okay. First rule, notice that you need one. Awareness is key. Awareness is key for everything. I mean, I say that all the time for change, but awareness, when you feel yourself flooded, triggered, you feel that part of you, either that, primitive inner child, the inner lizard, whatever you want to call it, starts to emerge and you start reacting, then you need to stop. And I think that's the most important part, because there's a part of us that really, really, really wants to be right. We want to defend. We want to react. And I think at that moment, it takes energy to just put it back. So this can mean going against the force of your inner tidal wave, which is demanding that you prove your point, surrendering your intense need to be seen, to be right, all of that. So you call for a timeout. One of you calls for a timeout. And I do want to say that this is not a F you, you're such a jerk, so I'm leaving timeout. This is I'm reactive right now. You might be reactive right now. Can we please take a timeout? That's how it goes, because it can easily turn to an aggressive stance if we start being super demanding and condescending with that energy. Okay, so you learn to recognize the signs within yourself that things have gotten too intense for a productive conversation, and you take a timeout. Now, the second step is you request a timeout. So you recognize, you request it. Now, when you request it, we do that in that way I suggested, and then you also want to set a time to reconvene. That's really important. So it's not, I'm leaving, I'm done, timeout, and then the other person's abandonment issues are all up in, they're in their energy because they just feel like you walked out. So at least 15 minutes, time to reconvene. Okay, third step, and this is a super important part. Do your own work. What often happens in timeouts, if we don't consciously do this step, is we just go to this place where we become lawyers, right? We're making a case why we're right and they're wrong, and all the times they've done this, and we're connecting dots, and we're making flowcharts about how, this is their problem. And that doesn't help, because then we reconvene and we're right back in the same place. So when you take that time out, you request it, you set a time, then you do your own work. What does that mean? Okay, this is where you put the lizard in the cage. You self-soothe in whatever way really works for you. So this could be deep breathing, this could be going for a walk or a run, maybe you need to read or journal or whatever, talk to a friend. But this is where you just start to calm down. This is also when you want to process to find accountability. Now, what I often do with couples with the timeout, instructions I give them, I always give them something called a conflict processing form. This is, I know it sounds kind of silly, right? Because it's like, do we need all this paperwork to communicate? But it's a good habit to get into, and then we don't need it after a while because we just kind of do this on our own. But in the beginning, we're not so good at this, so we need some help. So conflict processing form. This is an easy way to kind of bring your attention back to what's going on for me, what's happening. And on the form, it goes through feelings, I felt this way, this was coming up for me, all kinds of feelings here. And then what triggered these feelings? Because feelings are triggered by a belief, like I'm unlovable, they don't listen to me, he always is trying to control me, whatever, what's going on. And then, and most importantly, where does this come from? Is this a story that you've told yourself before? Is this not the first time this has come up, right? So that's super important, because 9 times out of 10, when we are in an argument with somebody or we're super triggered, I call it like the 80-20 rule. There's probably 20% that is about this situation that we're in, and 80% of all the baggage that we've created around this specific topic. So all the times we felt rejected as a kid, and all the times we felt rejected when we were teenagers, and all the times we felt rejected in our early relationships. And now this person, is just saying, yeah, I don't think I want to go to that party. And we're like, what? Right? So you get where I'm coming from. Old stuff gets triggered. And this is what relationships are all about. I mean, relationships are all about getting triggered, understanding what that's about. And when we heal in this moment, we actually heal all the way back. So our stuff is going to arise. That's the whole nature of relationships. That's why we're meant to be in them, so we can grow and evolve. And conscious conflict is one way we do that. So after we've done our own work and we were like, oh, this is my stuff a little bit coming up. Now, I will say this because this always happens. There are times when this doesn't mean that the other person doesn't have accountability to. There are times we screw up in relationships. We do that all the time. We're human, right? So if somebody has done something and wronged you, if they've lied or betrayed you, or they have literally made a mistake and you are triggered, there's a reality to that, that you have a right to be upset. And depending on that action, it might be more like 80-20 about the situation now. Truth. But there's always learning for you to do, always. So that's important to recognize, that there's always some work to be doing. So this doesn't mean that you give the person a pass. Like if somebody lied to you and you are hurt by that and you get into an argument about that and you take a time out and you're doing your work, that doesn't mean that you give them a pass. Like, oh, this is all my stuff. You lied to me. I'm triggered. It must be me. That's not it at all. But it is important that you get why that is so hurtful to you, whether it's the past, probably there's some of that, and the present. So when you come back and you will reconvene, you're clear on your boundaries. You're not being reactive. You're talking about your feelings. You're saying, this is what is not okay with me. Otherwise we can get into very aggressive and reactive places, and then we just reenact the past. Nothing happens, right? So regardless of who's right, who's wrong, who's more right, who's more wrong, you really, really want to do your own work. And I know that's really hard because I have been in many arguments where I am convinced I am right. I'm sure I am right. And so sometimes I do this kind of work with a lot of resentment, that I actually find out that maybe it's not all about the other person. It is actually about me. So once you've done all of that, then I want you to take some time to try considering the other person's position. You know them, hopefully. If you're triggered by somebody, you're in a relationship that you know them pretty well. So what were they feeling? Kind of think about it from the premise that if you knew that they were on your side, why might they have done what they did, right? So giving them the benefit of the doubt a little bit. From their perspective, how could their whatever happened make sense to them, right? So we want to just spend a little bit of time in compassion for the other side. How does their reaction make sense to them? Okay, so that we've done all that. And then we meet again to resume the conversation. We're ready for that now. And we always want to start with personal accountability. So one of the things I often tell couples is you can just exchange the sheets, like the worksheets. There you go. This is my accountability. This is yours. Or we can talk about it. We can say, hey, okay, so this is what came up for me. When you came home without picking up the dry cleaning, it really reminded me of all the times that I haven't felt heard. And the story that was running through my head is, you're not listening to me either. And at this point, by the way, if there's an issue that we need to talk about, like, what is the listening thing? What's happening here? What are you not hearing me? Am I not saying it? What's going on? Now we can actually have a conversation about that, right? And the other person's going to say, well, I really did have a lot on my mind, and I'm not good at this, or, I just literally forgot it, but it seemed like you were super reactive, or this is what it's bringing up. When you do that, I feel this. Now we can actually have a conversation in which we're thinking, we're resolving, we're sharing. So we start with personal accountability. We bring in the skills of assertiveness and active listening. So we're actually listening to understand and not listening to respond or be right. So we're actually, how does this make sense to that person? You know, how can we resolve this? And then, and this happens a lot, if you get triggered again, right? Because, these conversations, I tell you, you come back, you're like, okay, I did my work, you did your work, here we go. And all of a sudden, lizards come back up. You know, somebody says one thing and take another break. I have had arguments that we have taken time out, probably, I think the longest time, the record was 7, you know, over the course of like 5 days of, you know, lots of what's going on. So then you resume the conversation. And this is where you want to try to resolve it. You know, this is where you really want to try to say, okay, how do I feel about it? How do you feel about it? How can we find that middle ground? Now, there will be times that you might find yourself in gridlock, and this happens a lot with all relationships. There are certain things that are kind of non-negotiable that, hey, I feel this way, I'm over here, you're over here. And you both could be right. I mean, you both could have a point. And this is what I see so often in relationship work, that it's very rare that one person's right and one person's wrong. It's usually that they're both right for themselves. They're just not able to kind of meet in the middle. This happens a lot around religion. This happens around children and child rearing. This happens around money. This, you know, so these big topics, often we can find ourselves at opposite ends. That's a whole nother thing, gridlock. I'll have to do a video blog about that. There is a way to work through that, but it's just a little bit different. But still, this is helpful, you know, for pretty much every other conflict that you're going to have. And even with gridlock, that you'll be able to have a productive conversation. So I'm making sure I've said everything that I wanted to say. Oh, last thing, hugely important. Remember, in relationships, regardless of who you're in a relationship with, again, spouses, partners, kids, you know, colleagues, bosses, imagine you're on the same team. You know, if you knew that the other person had your back, how would you respond? Right? So that kind of changes the conversation a little bit when we go forward with that. This is not about being right. This is about understanding. This is about growing. And this is about using conscious conflict for, you know, the action that it's meant to, for the gifts that it's meant to give you. Okay, good. All right, I will be back soon with another little video blog. If there's anything that you want to hear about, make sure to contact me, alekasky.com, or you can find me at my website, www.alekasky.com. Okay, until next time, take those time outs.